Thank you all, and welcome again to the adjourned Planning Committee. And first off, I'd like to welcome you, which is, of course, the meeting's been held under the local authorities coronavirus meetings Wales regulations of 2020. And we'd like to manage expectations from the outset and highlight that there may be some glitches in the meeting. However, please be assured that we will learn from them and keep striving towards a seamless process. I'm also conscious that a number of the participants may have issues with bandwidth and would suggest that they turn off the video should that become an issue. And a reminder that the meeting is being broadcast live so that members of the public and others may view it. Please ensure that you mute all your microphones and remember to unmute them when you are called to speak. And Jeremy, now would you call out the names of those present, please, so we can record their attendance.
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, present.
Councillor Will Evans.
Well, he's present.
On mic, yeah, okay. Councillor Mary Jones.
They are present.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Present.
Councillor Des Thomas. Councillor Linda Tyler Lloyd. Councillor Mike White.
Present.
And officers, Ian Davis.
Present.
Jonathan Wills.
Present.
Matthew Bowyer. Sally Ann Evans.
Present.
And we've also got Councillor Kerry Evans.
Present.
And Geraint John Planning. Mr. Geraint John. Yeah. Okay. And I'm Jeremy Parkhouse, Democratic Services.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Richard Lewis, haven't we? And Lewis Gibbard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then on to item 2, which is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Are there any? Kerry?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, and just on the item land off of the Vadog that I'll be speaking to, because I live in the vicinity. I've had advice from legal that I have a personal prejudicial interest, so I'll be making my statement and then leaving the meeting.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. No others? No. Thank you, folks. Right. Item 3 then is the minutes of the previous meeting. To approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting. It's a correct record. You'll find those on pages 1 to 5. So we go through page 1, 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. Somebody move them as a true record, please.
I move.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much. Item 4 is, are there any items for deferral or withdrawal?
No, Chair, not in this one.
There were none. Yeah, thank you. So right, moving on then to item 5, the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And the first item on our agenda is on page 9, and that is that the land north of Rodfa Vadog in Cymru de Cairo. Right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land at Rodfa Vadog in the Morriston ward. It proposes the demolition of the existing building on site, which is outlined in green on the site plan. This is to be replaced with a development comprising of 29 affordable housing units, 3 retail units, parking, landscaping and ancillary works. I start by drawing members' attention to the update sheet which was circulated earlier this week. We've had one additional representation of objection which has been reproduced in full on the update sheet. In addition, the applicant has indicated that the developer is looking to demolish the existing building as soon as possible. To enable that to happen, if planning permission is granted, the timing of certain actions on the conditions needs to be amended. Those conditions have been updated and a full list of those amended conditions have been circulated as part of the update sheet. In terms of the history of the site, members may recall that the previous application in early 2019 was refused by committee for development of 40 affordable apartments and 3 retail units. The reasons for refusal related to the visual amenity, the impact of the proposal, and insufficient amenity space for future residents. That decision was subsequently appealed, and the appeal was dismissed, with the inspector considering that the development would be dominating and imposing to the surrounding area, and found the provision of private outdoor amenity space to be severely deficient and would provide unacceptable living conditions and amenity for future residents. This slide shows the context of the area. The application site is the car parking area with the existing retail store at the rear. At the back of the site, you see Rothbury-Eos, a cul-de-sac. The opposite side of the road, you have Clos Cricowell, and you have 2 existing units, a hair salon and the fish and chip shop, which are located to the side of the site. This is a view from the rear of the site. You'll notice that Rothbury-Eos is at an elevated level to the application site, which is in the area. You can see the building and the car parking area there. I'm going to show a few photographs from street level, so you'll have some idea of the context of the site. This is viewed from Rothbury-Vadog. You can see the existing single-storey retail stores, the hairdresser and the chip shop here, and the existing supermarket, which is proposed to be demolished in the centre of the site. This is a view looking up Rothbury-Vadog from the junction with Clos Cricowell. Again, you can see the existing retail stores which are to be retained. Another view from a similar area looking across the site. Looking now down more towards the eastern part of the site where we have the trees, and the access will be along that boundary of the site. And this photograph shows the existing roundabout on Rothbury-Vadog, which will provide access. You can see the access here, and that will be providing access to this development. So here's a layout plan of the proposed development. Essentially, the scheme is made up of 4 different buildings. The main...
Can I get this so that I can read that there?
Sorry?
The main building is Block 1, which is sited to the front of the site. This is to comprise of a 3-storey building with ground floor retail units and 16 flats on the upper floors. The second building is here to the east of the site. This will contain 2 flats and 2 dwellings. The third building at the top left corner will provide a terrace of 3 dwellings, and the fourth building in the northwest corner would provide 4 flats and 2 dwellings. In terms of the makeup of the site, the existing access will be utilised with a new 1.8 metre wide footway constructed along its length. 15 parking spaces are provided to the front of the commercial units, with new tree planting along the front perimeter. There will be hooped bike stands here to provide storage for cycles. As you progress into the site, you'll have the parking and turning areas to serve the new residential units at the rear of the site. There will be a suds basin here, and also an amenity area for the flats in this area. You'll notice from the photographs that the site does rise at the rear of the site, and as a result it's proposed to have gabion baskets along this boundary. You can see the cursor there just at the top of the site. As I said earlier, the properties at Rothbury-Eos are higher than the application site. In design terms, this is the proposal for the block at the front of the site. So at the ground floor, you'll have the retail units with residential units above. The scheme has been amended from first submission. Initially, there was 1 roof plane, but this has been broken up into separate sections. And that's also been supplemented by the addition of these dormer windows here, as well as some Juliet balconies across the front elevation and also on the rear elevation. In terms of the proposed materials, these will comprise grey concrete roof tiles, bath stone sills and headers, both light buff and dark red facing brickwork to the main walls, which will be supplemented by render. Windows and doors will be grey UPVC with grey aluminium shop fronts. This plan shows the proposed layout of that block. At ground floor area, you'll have the 3 retail units, and then on the upper floors, you'll have the flats either side of a central corridor, so the flats would look towards Rother Vardog at the front and towards the parking courtyard at the rear. Stairwells to access the residential elements would be on each side of the building. So this is the first accommodation block on the left-hand side as you come into the rear of the site. This would provide 2 flats and 2 dwellings. The flats will be provided at ground and first floor level in the gable elevation. So it doesn't, sorry. So the flats will be provided at gable and ground floor level, ground and first floor level in the gable elevation, with the other 2 properties as single dwellings. Brickwork is mainly prevalent, with some render to the upper course of the main gable. This is the second block to the top left of the site as you look at the layout plan. This is a proposed terrace of 3 dwellings. If you notice on this top right-hand side, you can see the difference in levels between the application site as it rises up to the properties at the rear. These properties would be side on to that land, and you can see there the gabion baskets which are proposed to retain that. This shows the final block which would look into the site. It's a similar design to the others, albeit slightly longer with more accommodation. The 2 end sections here and here would provide ground and first floor flats, so 4 flats in total, and the middle 2 units would provide dwellings. Particularly draw attention to the bottom section on this drawing. This is a cross section through the site from Rother Vardog at the front to Rother at the rear. It gives a good indication of the level difference across the site, particularly between the land to the north, which is this area here. The applicant, as part of his submission, demonstrated the lines of sight from the property, which would show that generally there would be no significant overlooking from the application site to the properties at the rear, particularly as those properties are higher. What it does show is the distance between the properties and the retaining walls, which is one of the concerns which has been highlighted in the report. And obviously, I'll go on to the issues relating to that in a minute. So in terms of the key planning considerations, these largely relate to whether the concerns raised in the previous application have been addressed, namely the visual impact of the scheme and its impact upon residential amenity. In terms of design, at the last appeal, the inspector considered that the principle of a 3-storey building to the front would not necessarily be harmful to the character of the area, but in the last application had concern with the scale and massing of the scheme that had been proposed. Members may recall that the design of that property was very modern and particularly bulky. In this instance, your officers feel that the design of Block 1 is more respectful of its surroundings, and the pitched roofs in general form would not be out of keeping in terms of the character of the area. The other residential units proposed to this development complement the main block and are not considered to be harmful. The concern that has arisen in this proposal, as evidenced by the placemaking comments, is the fact that the large proportion of the rear of the site is to be hard surfaced, and the concerns that the gardens are not of adequate depth and facing onto a very high retaining wall at the rear. Officers have discussed this with the applicant to consider whether any amendments could be made to the scheme, but the applicant has indicated the scheme would not be viable with a reduction in the number of units. Another issue that was raised in the appeal decision was the loss of some trees to create the access into the site, with the inspector considering that there would be little opportunity to provide a landscaping scheme, including replacement trees, to compensate for the loss of the existing mature trees. In this application, there's no change in terms of the access and the need for removal of some trees, but there is additional space throughout the site where landscaping can be achieved. As a result, the Council's tree officer is satisfied that the level of landscaping can be achieved through appropriate planning conditions and would mitigate the loss of the trees to provide the access. In terms of other considerations, you will have noted from the report that the Highway Authority is satisfied with the scheme from a highway safety perspective, subject to planning conditions. Protected species were identified on site as the existing building contains a bat roost, and a separate NRW licence will be needed to allow demolition of the building because of those protected species. Appropriate planning conditions are recommended. This scheme is something which is very much in the balance. your officers accept that there will be impacts arising from the scheme that cannot be mitigated, namely the parking area and amenity impacts arising to the rear of plots 24 to 29. This needs to be balanced against the benefits of the scheme that would arise as a result of the development. The scheme will provide for 100% affordable housing in an area where the policy provision sets out the requirement for 10% provision. The scheme is therefore providing excess of the normal policy requirement, and this forms significant weight in the planning balance. It's finely balanced. However, it is considered that the provision of 100% affordable housing, which can be secured through a Section 106 agreement, coupled with the positive changes to the scheme since the previous refusal, marginally outweigh the identified harm. On this basis, the officer recommendation is one of approval, subject to the Section 106 agreement and appropriate conditions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. First, I'll call Geraint John on behalf of the applicant. Geraint, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for that. Yes, good morning, members. My name is Geraint John, agent on behalf of the applicant for the scheme Morganstone Limited. As explained in the detailed committee report and Ian's detailed presentation to you there, the proposed development seeks permission for 29 affordable units, of which 7 are houses, 22 are apartments, and there are 3 retail units. The report before you outlines that officers consider that the application is acceptable in relation to all material considerations, with the recommendation for the application to be approved. Given this, I'll keep this address brief. As pointed out, the application is a resubmission of a previous scheme for 40 affordable apartments, so obviously a reduction of 11. A scheme, of course, previously that was refused at planning committee and later dismissed at appeal. The scheme before you now has been developed following and with the benefit of considerable, detailed and continuous dialogue with your officers over the last year. This has resulted in a well-considered and acceptable scheme, which has been revised to reflect concerns relating to design and the layout of the previous proposals. It obviously should be noted that no objections have been received from statutory consultees, including ecology, highways, trees and drainage. Whilst reservations have been passed regarding some aspects of the scheme from a placemaking perspective, these are in relation to one element of the scheme only, and overall it should be noted that the planning officers have considered these comments and have applied an appropriate planning balance. The Council's Housing Services team have noted the high need for affordable housing in this location and provide support for the proposal accordingly. Moreover, the committee report confirms that the fact that the accommodation to be provided is 100% affordable housing, where there is a significant need for such affordable housing, is given significant weight in the planning balance. In addition, of course, the proposed retail provision provides replacement and enhanced facilities to the site to the benefit of existing residents as much of those that will occupy the scheme if approved, of course. This use and element of the scheme is considered acceptable by council officers accordingly. So to conclude, the proposed scheme as such provides much needed affordable housing on a previously developed site in a sustainable location, with the design of the development having been modified considerably to now provide a much improved and acceptable scheme. Accordingly, for those reasons and those set out by your officers in the report, the applicant respectfully urges members to approve the application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And call one of the local members now. Councillor Kerry Evans, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks everybody for listening to me today. Just to begin with, I think it's important to say that I'm speaking on behalf of myself today as a councillor, not on behalf of all the Morriston councillors. I think that's really important to that's minuted. And to begin with, what I'd like to say is, like I said last time, in the previous time this application came before the previous application came before the committee, that I and all the other councillors in Morrison are very supportive of a development at this site. The site needs to be developed, and what's currently there is a bit of an eyesore, and it certainly is something that needs development. And furthermore, we are all of us, myself included, very supportive of the concept of social housing on this site also. Furthermore, we have no concerns about the developer in this context. The developer has a sound reputation for building good quality housing in Swansea and the surrounding areas. And there's a however coming, as I'm sure you'll get from my tone. However, I cannot personally, on good conscience, support this application as it currently stands. And there's two main reasons for that. But first of all, following from what Mr. Davis and Mr. John have said, they've both referenced the previous application, and that application was turned down by yourselves and then by the independent inspector in Cardiff for two main reasons. And the main question I would encourage you to ask yourselves as a committee today is, those two principal reasons that the previous application was turned down, has this new design addressed those reasons? And the answer, I'm afraid, is categorically no. So the previous application was turned down, one, because of the visual amenity, the impact of the size of the block, particularly the block 1 at the front of the plan, which remains in the current plan, would have, and also the lack of amenity for future residents and heritage and placemaking concerns. And I would argue that neither of those things have been addressed in this plan at all. So the first reason that I object is that the proposed development, by virtue of its design, scale and massing, is out of keeping with the character and is therefore contrary to policy PS2 of the local development plan. As I mentioned just then, the existing block 1, remains at 3 stories and in the council officer's own words, will appear as much more of a prominent feature in the street scene and surrounding area than any other residential dwellings. Furthermore, the independent inspector, when turning down the developer's appeal on the previous application, refused that appeal on the basis that the development would be dominating and imposing in the surrounding areas. Now, that's not been altered whatsoever. So I would ask myself, and if I was on the planning committee, I would be asking myself, if that was relevant then, why is it not relevant now? The second reason that I cannot support this application is that the proposed development, by virtue of its scale, is considered an over-intensive form of development, and in the words of our own placemaking and heritage advisor, fails to meet the placemaking objectives of Planning Policy Wales. Okay, the overdevelopment of this site is what I would argue it is evidenced by the findings of Mr. Iestyn Jenkins, who stated in the pre-planning stage that he would have to recommend the planning for refusal, as the plans for the rear of the site did not meet the placemaking objectives of Planning Policy Wales. He made a number of comments in that respect, which included that the rear of the site is dominated by central hard standing, that this approach does not accord with the placemaking approach advocated in PPW, and further raises questions as to approach to biodiversity enhancement as set out in this national policy document. He concluded that, in summary, the above points suggest that the current approach represents an overdevelopment of the site, with the layout to the rear be completely dominated by parking and turning areas. He went on to say, given the above, it is considered that the scheme needs significant amendments, and unless these amendments are made, then he recommends refusal for failing to meet the placemaking objectives of PPW. As a committee, I'm sure you'd want to know that, given Mr. Jenkins laid out very clearly the deficiencies in the plan and suggestions for making those changes, that in his subsequent comment on the 11th of May, he said that due to lack of any meaningful changes to the rear plan and the rear of the site, this point still stands. And as such, the scheme fails to meet the placemaking objectives of Planning Policy Wales. So the question is, given that Mr. Jenkins set out quite clearly what the changes needed to happen were, why has the developer not made those changes? And I would argue they've not made those changes because they can't make those changes because this is an overdevelopment. And there's no room to make those changes because it wouldn't be profitable if they did make those changes. I understand what Mr. Davis is saying, that on balance, they are minded to approve the site because it is affordable housing effectively. But my view on this is why I'm supportive of that. as an authority, we cannot allow developers to use affordable housing as a loophole for building inappropriate and substandard housing for our citizens, which I would argue Mr. Jenkins has made that case quite clearly, particularly when it comes to placemaking.
Could you begin to wind up now, please?
Yes, to conclude, while I support the development of this site, I cannot support this development in its current guise. The application contradicts key principles in the local authority development plan. And I ask you to say no to this development and ask the developer to revise their plans, to come back and produce plans that are more in keeping with the community and that are supportive of the well-being of future residents. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I got one hand up at the moment. Is Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for the presentation and to both the applicant and to Councillor Evans. And I have to say I'm in sympathy in some of it with Councillor Evans. Although we need affordable housing, I have issues with this retaining wall. Number one, who is going to be responsible for it if the application does go ahead? And also, we also bring up also about render, because we have a problem with render in Swansea and it goes very unsightly after a matter of years. So I hope that has been addressed. But I do agree with Councillor Evans that people seem to use affordable housing as a loophole. We know that affordable housing is needed across the city, but it shouldn't be as to the detriment of the new residents and any other residents that are actually going to live there. And to look out onto a car park with a garden that's really small, and gardens are not very big in most modern houses now, I think you're asking people to live in an area, in an amenity that is not really very satisfactory for their well-being. I will listen to others, but I have very mixed feelings about this site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I got Councillor Mike White next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My concerns within reading in the report, clearly as Councillor Evans has pointed out, issues raised by our placemaking officer. And also regards to the rear of the property, where the developer is only going to have part sort of retaining wall and others not retaining wall. Surely this is an issue for security and for the residents that will be there. And I think that if we are minded to perhaps support the application, I know we need affordable housing, but that the development is obviously finished with the proper retaining wall or fencing, so that there is actually security there and privacy for the people that would be wanting to live in development. But minded to say that if we do sort of support it, that condition is put on to it, that's included, because it's not just about the issue of the cost. You know, we've got to take into consideration issues of the actual development being actually completed properly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Councillor Mike White. Livness, sorry.
Yeah. Couple of times over the last couple of years, we've had applications come before us and we have gone against the application because of the lack of parking. Now, this particular development, I can see the developer has put adequate parking in for all the residents that may or may not decide to live there. And now Councillor Kerry Evans is saying there's too much parking. So it's either not enough or too much. Personally, I think the development is fine. I voted for it last time and I will vote for it this time, especially now that they've reduced the amount of units by 11 units. And how far do you go? How many units have you got to reduce it before it becomes not viable and it's left as a desolated piece of land that is an eyesore to the residents that are living in the area? So personally, I think it's a very, very good development and I will be voting for it.
Okay,
Thank you.
so much. I got Councillor Will Evans next, and then Councillor Anderson. Will. Mute. Can you? Oh, there are.
Yeah, okay. I keep putting it off mute. Somebody's muting me. I don't know who it is. Very briefly, when Mr. Davis opened his address, he mentioned the concerns previously of this boundary wall, and he would go back to it, but I don't recall him touching or giving us much information about it. So I'd like more information on this boundary wall, exactly what is the issue, and has it been satisfactorily resolved? Because that was a major point in the initial planning application. So if I can get that further information, clarity, please.
Yeah, we'll come back to that then. Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. I previously went there on the site visit back in March 2019, and in Kerry Evans's words, it was an eyesore, and I suppose it still is today. I'm glad to see that the developer has come back to our offices and worked with them to redefine it. So I will be supporting this today, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other hands up? No? No. Just on my only comment is when it comes to render, it's the quality of the render that matters. I mean, I've rendered on our property since 1982, and we've never suffered any problems with mold or anything. It's a matter of the right quality going in and the quality of the paint that goes on there. So, no other member wishes to speak? No? Did you want to come back with anything?
Share my screen again, Chair, to bring the presentation up. A couple of points that were raised in terms of the retaining wall. The distance between this house and the retaining wall is 9.3 metres. Normally, we'd look for a distance of 10 metres. It's a guideline, and as I indicated earlier, it is something that causes concern that it isn't the 10 metres, but the properties are DQR compliant, which is the standard that housing look for. It's just an issue which we have wrestled with, and I think it's on balance because of the amount of affordable housing that's being provided. We do think that this does provide sufficient amenity space for the properties. I'll go back to the layout plan in a minute to show you some of the amenity space in the property. But while I'm on this plan, the question was raised about maintenance of the retaining wall. That would be the owner of the site, which I understand would be a housing association, would take on the scheme from the developer. In terms of the layout, on the previous application, you may recall there was a block at the front similar to this one and a separate block running north-south at the rear. With this application, because you've got the houses at the rear and the flats, each of those properties has its own amenity space, whereas previously there was no amenity space being provided for the properties. The block at the front, in terms of amenity space for them, there's an area here at the back of the property which would be provided as amenity space. And in addition, balconies have been added to the flats, not to all of them, but to some of them, to provide effectively a link to the outdoor area. It's certainly something which has been raised as part of the coronavirus issue that people in flats didn't have these outdoor spaces, and at least these balconies will contribute towards that. There is also access to public open space nearby. I think on the previous appeal, the issue was, could that be the only amenity space provided for future occupiers? And it was concluded as part of that appeal process that no, it couldn't be the only amenity space. This scheme has addressed that by providing, as I say, the individual amenity space for the dwellings and some shared amenity space for the occupiers of the flats to the front of the site. In terms of placemaking, yes, it is an issue. This is the parking area we're looking at, and as you come into the site, you will see this parking area here. In terms of parking requirements, the number of spaces being provided is the absolute minimum that can be provided for development of this nature. And I mentioned that the 106 agreement would secure 100% affordable housing. The reason for that is all linked to highway safety and parking requirements. Because of the nature of the occupancy of these dwellings, there would be a lower car ownership. The data shows that car ownership is lower for those properties. By restricting it to 100% affordable housing, that would ensure that those car ownership levels are retained. The developers indicated that if they did reduce the number of dwellings to try and address some of the issues that have been identified by placemaking, the site wouldn't be viable for development. It is an issue we have to look at. It is a concern. We don't feel that the concerns raised are sufficient to outweigh the benefits that will be gained from the development from affordable housing. It is a balance, but we feel the balance should come down in favour of approval. It's a site that needs redevelopment. It's on the margins of acceptability in terms of amenity space, but we feel that it is acceptable, hence the recommendation.
Okay.
So, Chair, I've got I can show access actually to the previous plan, so members could have an indication of the previous scheme on the site. So that was the block, it's coming up on the screen shortly. That was the block that was previously refused. So you can see it's much more blocky, much squarer, flat roof. So in terms of the impact of that development, which the inspector highlighted in the appeal decision, the inspector indicated that 3 stories wasn't unacceptable per se. It was the nature of the previous scheme that was unacceptable. As I showed earlier with the property, and I'll show you again now. It's a significantly different scheme. You haven't got the very rectangular square nature of the scheme. You've got it broken up with the various gable features, reduction and variation in roof heights, and the step up from the existing property to the stairwell to the first part of the centre part. So we do feel that this has addressed the impact, the visual impact of the block that was previously approved and subject to the appeal. So just for members' information, really a comparison of the 2 blocks and how we would look from Road Nevada.
Yeah, well worth looking at. Fair comment. I got Matthew. Did you want to come in, Matthew Boyer?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Only quickly, Ian's covered one of the points I was going to make regarding car ownership levels and its relation to tenure. Typically, this kind of social housing would have a car ownership rate of about 50%. Only 50% of properties-ish would have access to a car. The other point I wanted to make was regarding the retaining wall. The West Glamorgan Act would require any retaining structure over 1.5 metres in retained height to be approved by the local authority. So we would still retain the ability to influence the design and makeup of that wall.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask a question, Chair?
Yeah, I've got Councillor Mary Jones first, and then yourself, Peter. Yeah. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I'm still concerned about this wall, and you said it'll be the responsibility of the provider, but going forward for perpetuity, it may not always be that. Is there any way we can condition something that wall is looked after? I'm thinking of Bryn Mill Wall. I know they were private ownership, but we did have major problems, and we have all over the city, down in West Cross as well. So I think we really need to be careful what we are approving, and with this wall. The other point was, and I'm sorry, I might have missed it on one of the slides, is what about the parking for the units, and how is it going to be separated from the actual residence parking? Is there a separate parking, or is it all like for a free-for-all, for a better word?
Yeah, there's a separate car parking area for the retail units. Looking at the size of the retail units, they should be providing 12 spaces, but they provided 15. That includes 3 disabled and 2 parent and child. So I'm content there's enough parking, and it is separate from the residential parking.
Cheers, Matthew. Okay, Councillor Blackman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The officer made reference to the balconies as being a substitute for open space or access to the outside. But I understood they were Juliet balconies, which means, of course, that you can't sit on them because effectively it just opens up onto a metal frame. Am I correct in that, or am I misunderstood the officer?
Yeah, Councillor Black, yes, you're right. They are Juliet balconies. They're not a substitute for the amenity space below, but they would provide a link to the open air from the flats, whereas previously none existed. There is an amenity area within the site as well for the occupiers of those flats. So it's not a substitute for amenity space, but it's in addition to amenity space. But it is a Juliet balcony.
Effectively, it allows you to open up your French windows and have fresh air come in. You can't actually sit on the balcony, can you?
Yeah. No, you'd have to sit inside with the door open.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Councillor Linda Tyler-Lloyd, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. No, the only concerns that I have, I definitely think it's a vast improvement to the original. And I can remember going to the site and it was, something needs to be done. But my concern again is, with the coronavirus and people not being able to get outside or have gardens, that is my only worry, is that, are they going to feel sort of claustrophobic and trapped inside? And like Peter said, they can't go out onto a balcony. It's just a Juliet balcony. I didn't realise that. That's my only concern about this. And I'm like this about whether to vote for it or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. You've got your hand up there, Councillor White.
Yeah, just clarification, Chair, really. On page 32, regarding the retaining wall, paragraph 2, it states that with regards to the plots 17 to 23, there will be no retaining walls, but there will be then in plots 21 to 23. And that's what I was asking, is if the retaining wall should be protecting all of the properties, not just, certain sections of the properties. Could I have clarification on that? And if possible, perhaps a condition that a retaining wall that is at the rear wall of the properties.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come to that now. Anyone else wish to speak? There's a number of hands up. If you're not going to speak, could you take them down, please? I got 3 hands up still there. Yeah, 2 now. Right, okay. No? Matthew, do you want to come back or put your hand up? Cheers. Oh,
no, that was a mistake.
It's all right. I know it's right. Was there anything?
Yeah, I'll just get the hand up again, Chair.
Yeah,
Just in response to Councillor White's question, the plots 21 to 23, here the retaining wall runs along the back of these plots here, and then the side of this plot here, and then the rear of the plots here. It's integral to the design that those plots will be provided, and again, Councillor Jones raised the issue. The site will be owned by the housing association. They will take it over from the developer. They would be responsible for maintenance, and that would be a matter that would be covered then if it did become unsafe under the legislation. So building control would deal with dangerous structures and so on. So we wouldn't need to condition it from a planning point of view, but it would be integral to the development and owned by the housing association which operate the site in the future.
All right. Okay. So no other hands up to speak, so we'll move to the recommendation now, which one is of approval.
Yeah.
And gentlemen, will call out the names and could you respond accordingly, please?
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approved, Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Peter Black.
Against.
Councillor Will Evans.
Approve.
Councillor Mary Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Mike Lewis. Councillor Mike Lewis.
Approve. Approve.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Des Thomas? Is there? No. Councillor Linda Taylor-Lloyd?
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mike White?
Approve.
And Councillor Paul Lloyd?
Approve. Thank you.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 1.
Yeah. Okay, so that's carried. Thank you, folks. And now move on to the next item on our agenda. Sorry. Which is Felin Wen Farm. Well, that's on page 44 on your agenda. Thank you.
All of this.
All right, bear with us.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks planning permission for the installation of a solar farm on land at Felin Farm. The site comprises 13.89 hectares of land and would produce a capacity of 9 megawatts of energy. As your report indicates, following consultation, no objections were raised by statutory consultees subject to conditions. 13 letters of objection and 49 signature petition of objection from third parties was received. They are detailed in the report, and 4 letters of support for the scheme were received. The application site lies within a local search area for renewable and low carbon development under LDP planning policy EU1. National planning policy also recognises the role of the planning system in delivering such development, and PPW states significant weight should be given to the Welsh Government targets to increase renewable and low carbon energy generation. In principle, therefore, there is clear support in policy for developments of this nature. Whilst the principle of the development is acceptable, we have to consider what are the impacts, specific impacts of each of the developments. In terms of visual impact, a landscape and visual impact assessment was submitted with the application, and that investigated a number of viewpoints to assess the visual impacts of the development. The assessment concluded there was no critically damaging impact on heritage assets and low or negligible overall impacts on the visual quality of the open countryside. The retention and addition of hedgerows along the site would minimise the impacts on both private and public vantage points. A glint and glare assessment was submitted with the application and thus concluded there would be no undue impact on the nearest residential properties. The Ecology Department have looked at the application and, subject to conditions, have raised no significant concerns. Access to the site would be from Rhydypandy Road. If you could just see the bottom corner of the map there of the solar farm, the access would be on the right-hand side where my cursor is at the moment. It's estimated that construction traffic would need to use the site for about 4 months, but afterwards there would be minimal traffic entering and leaving the site. In terms of the development, your officers consider that the proposal does comply with relevant local and national policy and would contribute to national renewable energy targets. No significant harm has been identified, and on that basis, your officers are recommending approval of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. Any members wish to speak?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. Who's there? Who's there?
Councillor Evans.
Oh, sorry, well, how are you? Just grabbing a new pen. My other one ran out. Councillor Evans, when you're ready.
Can Mr. Davis comment on a decommissioning of this farm at some point in the future? Is that covered in the report?
Yeah, and then Councillor White, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point in regards to the construction transport management plan. Clearly, Rhydypandy Road links to the Morrison Hospital there. A very, very busy road there. Is it possible perhaps a condition can be put on during construction that signage can be put on that road indicating to motorists that obviously the heavy plant, if the idea is also perhaps give that some consideration.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just looking at recommendation 11, where effectively given permission for 40 years, after which all the solar panels and infrastructure is to be removed. And my question really is there a bond or being lodged as part of this process? I'm mindful, I mean, this is not the same scale, obviously, but I'm mindful of open cast sites where the coal has been taken out and then there's no money to restore the site. I'm just wondering, is there a bond process involved here so that we can guarantee that at the end of that 40 years, there is money, sufficient resources available to actually restore the site to its previous condition?
Okay, get your answers now. Anyone else? No one else? Got a question? No? Sure.
In terms of decommissioning raised by Councillor Evans, condition 10 of the recommendation would deal with the decommissioning. The developer would be required to submit a scheme showing how it would be done, and there's timescales set within that condition for the works to be done and for reinstatement of the land. So any decommissioning would be covered by 10. I'll actually jump to Councillor Black's query because they are linked in terms of that. There is no provision within this application for a bond. The costs of decommissioning are not, as you say, in the same scale as open cast, and it's not something that is identified in the policies that would be required on a site of this nature. In terms of Councillor White and the signage, in terms of traffic management, a traffic management plan is required as part of the application. And as part of that scheme, we can look at, in conjunction with highways, at appropriate signage for the development. Matt may want to add something further in terms of that as well.
Just going to call you in now, Matthew, when you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, as Ian's just said, obviously they'd be required to notify street works when the work begins. There's a requirement for a construction traffic management plan, which would be subject to negotiation with the Street Works Department as regard to signage on the haulage routes. But we're looking at probably half a dozen HGV movements a day during the construction period, so we're not massive amounts of traffic, but yeah, we can certainly look at additional signage on Reader Pandy Road and Pantlasai Road.
Something. Anyone else wish to speak? No? No, nothing else to come up. No. Okay then, folks, unless anyone else puts their hand up now, we can see the recommendation there is, again, is approval. And we will now take a vote on that recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Yes, this can only enhance our carbon footprint. I approve, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Approve.
Councillor Will Evans.
Approve.
Councillor Mary Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Approve.
Councillor Linda Tyler Lloyd.
Approve.
Councillor Mike White.
Approve.
And Councillor Paul Lloyd.
Approve.
Okay, that's all in favour.
That's unanimous. Thank you, folks. And final item on our agenda, you see agenda item 6 there, is the report on the Bryn, which has come back to us now.
Thank you, Chair. It's just being brought for members' information, as we do with appeals that have been subject to committee overturns. This application was considered by committee in December, refused because of the impact on the character and appearance of the local area. I think members may recall that the proposals for 3 dwellings, committee indicated they'd probably be satisfied with 2, but not with the 3. The inspectors looked at the application and has concluded that there would be no material harm to the character and appearance of the area subject to conditions, one of which is for details of samples of the materials to be used on the external surface. The scheme, as submitted, had quite modern materials proposed for the bungalow, and the inspector felt they were a bit out of keeping with the area, and so put a condition on that would require different materials to be agreed. So it's just for information, and the inspector's report is attached, so the committee could read the full details.
Okay, thank you, folks. So that item was for information, and that concludes the business of today's meeting. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Enjoy, Mike.
Cheerio. Cheerio. Cheers.